The Brothers WISP is brought to you by Sonar, a scalable, intuitive, and comprehensive ISP billing and operational support system. Learn more at Sonar.Software. Tower coverage is your RF propagation system to empower your network, real-time data metrics, enable your coverage area, reaching your customer base, and more. The industry's best RF propagation mapping system allows website integration for customer sign-up and pre-qualification. Use this data to scientifically plan network expansion and help your WISP succeed. Get a free trial today at towercoverage.com. Preseam is a cloud-based quality of experience platform that helps regional fixed wireless and fiber operators manage subscribers and optimize network health across access technologies and vendors. A 4-time winner of WISPA's Service of the Year award, Preseam provides data-powered tools and insightful KPIs that help reduce support and training costs, drive growth, and help benefit every team at an ISP. Visit preseam.com for more details. Whew, that one was hard.
The Brothers WISP, Brothers WISP. The Brothers WISP. The Brothers.
You're now listening to Greg, it's the Brothers WISP. Let's take a ride through space on this mothership. Wireless networking, we talk about equipment and methodology, so sit back and start learning. Lighting up the tower so people can start searching. Shooting up the web in neighborhoods, net surfing. We got horrible jokes, we're loud and annoying, but we're informative facts, we're not disappointing. Just give us a listen.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy with the Brothers WISP. This is gonna be episode number... I should be 188. Sweet. Then in a week and a half, we're gonna be over at WISPAPalooza. Kirnak, you're gonna be there, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then you've been on the trade show Bonanza. I think last time we talked, you were getting ready to go to a bunch. How have the trade shows been?
Yeah, I've been at, I think, 5 conferences in the last couple of months. So the fall conference season is in full swing. So I've been traveling a lot, and most of these were actually cybersecurity conferences. So yeah.
Well, and I think that's kind of what your product is kind of meant for. Well, sort of, I guess. And how do you sell that at cybersecurity? Or is
Change
it
management,
useful?
change detection, change management, like unwanted changes are one of indicators of compromise. And in general, the bigger you are, change management starts playing a bigger role, especially with certifications like ISO 27000. It requires change management, it requires change review. Then you have all the auditing stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Auditing of both the configuration itself, but also the runtime state of the network. And so, Unimus deals with all of that. So, why I've been going to so many conferences actually is that in Europe we have a new regulation for network security. Actually, it's called NIS 2, and it actually covers all critical infrastructure, which includes internet providers actually. And you can imagine, because of the geopolitical climate, the security of critical infrastructure is like a hot topic here right now. And like part of that regulation, it's mandated that every single network which falls under specific requirements has to have all of these, like I mentioned, of course, backups, but also change management, change detection, the ability to audit the network at scale, etc., etc. So we've been,
Wow, that's a pretty big. So, like, how large do you need to be before this actually applies to you?
If you are a one-person ISP, it applies to.
Okay. Wow.
It's not
okay.
really from size. It depends on like whether you are categorized as critical infrastructure, which ISPs are.
Okay. That's a pretty big. That's a pretty hefty like bunch of regulation to put on there. Like, I get it, and there's definitely needs for it because there's plenty of little ISPs. I know guys who they don't even have firewalls on their MikroTiks. They're just they run off of the source IP or Winbox, and that's not going
if you
to.
think about it as an ISP, you really are in control of the traffic. That's what you are paid for, right? To transit traffic. So yeah, if you're as an ISP, as a carrier, if you get compromised, then it is so it makes it so much easier to attack the end users and to do nefarious things with traffic. And this goes in many ways, like also with BGP and traffic interception and hijacking through BGP. But it all usually starts with somehow exploiting access to the to the management of the network, right? To the control plane of the network, and yeah.
So then, what are other tools that you've been seeing at these security conferences that might be kind of useful for smaller guys?
Yeah, it's your usual stuff. So the regulation is not just about networking; it's about all infrastructure. So you have a lot of tooling for servers, and you of course need monitoring. You need like access management, log management. You need all of these things, which, to be fair, you should have. Like, you should know who's logging into your routers. You should know when somebody's trying to brute force into your your management plane. You should be able to audit who and when and how access the network. These are quite basic things. So, and of course that goes also for servers and the application layer and everything else. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
So I've actually noticed a lot of MikroTik, like there's more detailed change management in the logs showing up in version 7. Would you suspect that that's a part of the NIS requirements?
Did you see the new modes in MikroTik?
Well, there's the new modes. So like you basically set, and whatever features are available in that mode are only allowed in that mode, and you can't change modes without.
And if you actually lock out the router if a change is attempted to something that is locked by the mode. So for those listening, there is a new feature in MikroTik where you can basically put your MikroTik in a mode. And you can imagine this, like the mode would be a home router versus a basic configuration versus advanced versus enterprise versus carrier. And the router will only allow you to configure certain things, and it will actually disable features. Like, for example, when you are in home mode, it will disable sniffer, it will disable traffic generator, it will disable proxy, even like SOX proxy, which we know in the past has been one of the main culprits of how when your router got exploited, how it would be used, right? The proxy would be set up and then that would be used for all kinds of nefarious reasons. So MikroTik added new modes where even if you, for example, in home mode, when you even attempt to enable SOX proxy, it will lock out the router. And so you know that somebody's been messing with stuff they shouldn't. And I would imagine very much it's part.
When you say lock out, is it like logs you out and you can't access, or is it just? I thought it just threw a flag.
It will get flagged, and when the router is in a flagged mode, you cannot do any configuration changes on it.
Oh, okay.
Unless I misunderstand, like it's very new, so I read through the documentation, but I haven't played with it yet.
Yeah, I haven't played with it either. I'm actually pretty excited about that because it's like, yeah, you lose out on a lot of different like things that may be useful as diagnostics wise, like bandwidth test. That's actually really useful to be messing out on. But I think aren't these
you can enable it explicitly, like you can.
And you can.
I am in home mode, but also I have bandwidth test.
Okay. So then, just when you're provisioning your Wi-Fi routers, if you're a guy who uses MikroTik for your customers' routers, which I've done in the past, I really like that because you have so many tools available to you.
Yeah.
And as like one, tools, and two, the just responsiveness of the UI to what exactly is happening at that moment. So like, you can watch and see somebody get closer or further away from an access point in real time, or you can like see small bits of noise or whatever. There's a lot of little things that I really missed.
Just the basic stuff that when you reconfigure something, you don't have to reboot the device. Like just that, it makes everything so much faster.
Yeah, it makes a lot of diagnostics and just your life work. So as not appealing as MikroTik's wireless has been in the last 4 or 5 years, and a lot of people have complained, and I've heard them, and I bashed my head against it and made it work so that to the point to where it was working good for me. I'm not saying I could go do it twice, but I was able to do it, and if I, idiot, can figure this out, I'm certain most people who know a little bit about wireless should be able to muddle through MikroTik's wireless configuration. So
Yeah,
that said,
I've also had fairly decent success with MikroTik Wireless. I'm not saying it's the best and the greatest, and it will work in every single situation, and it's gonna compete with Tarana. No, not at all.
No.
A completely different thing and a different product and a different price range and everything. But like under the right circumstances, it can perform.
Yeah, and I'm mostly talking about like home Wi-Fi. Yeah, and that's where I've had my best. I think outdoor, I think they just kind of got left behind just because they don't have the higher speed rates.
Like I said, for specific use cases, it can work, but
mhm.
yeah, definitely
So
indoor and especially noisy indoor environments like corporate buildings, etc. It's not actually bad.
yeah, as long as you're willing
Again,
to
I'm
do the
not saying it
configuration.
will
Yeah,
yeah, definitely. And again, I'm not saying it will be like to the level of Ruckus or anything else,
yeah,
right? But again, like a completely different price range, completely different use case. But yeah,
yeah.
I've made it
What
work
you're
as
doing.
well.
But yeah, no, I think if you had yeah, you could just leave these in home mode. It prevents downgrading. It turns off zero tier, but like hotspot, proxy, sock, sniffer, Armon, email, scheduler. Scheduler's kind of nice sometimes.
Yeah, you
Traffic
can
gen.
explicitly enable it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can turn these on. You just have to have the customer reboot it for you, or
Press a
the
button.
technician.
Yeah.
Yeah, press the button, do whatever you need it to do. That's completely doable. So, and I think that would actually, because when I'm doing tech support, I like to incorporate the customer into some level of that diagnostics. One, they're doing something, so they feel like I'm doing something, and two, sometimes they can learn, and sometimes I can say, okay, we're going to reboot this, and we're going to put it into diagnostic mode, so that, and hey, if
Which
they see
now
it
is
reboot,
technically true.
yeah, it is technically true. I've kind of BS'd it some days. Yeah, you're in diagnostic mode. I'm just sending your logs back to the log server. Or even less stuff than that. But some people like to hear, and hey, if this is something you're doing, it's actually really cool. And hey, now MikroTik's done a bunch to prevent their equipment from being part of the largest botnet in the world, or at least the highest bandwidth botnets, or DDoSes. I think MikroTik's has like some of the top 10 records. Is sourced from MikroTik devices, which is a bummer.
It's not been just
Um,
MikroTik. Like in recent
oh yeah,
months, especially, like Palo Alto had some big exploits. Fortinet had some really bad stuff happen to them as well. So
oh yeah,
it's not
yeah,
just
yeah,
me.
yeah. No, but MikroTik's doing something significant about it, to help prevent it. Hopefully, we'll see. Honestly, I bet you a good number of guys are just going to change these things over to advanced mode, so then they don't have to mess around with it, which is a bummer. So,
Well, it's
there's
like
some,
another tool, right?
yeah.
You have the option, like with everything else. If you use it, that's up to you.
Mm-hmm. So, um, but yeah. So back to the NIS rules. Do you think that some of the changes in MikroTik, like syslog, like there's details of this rule was changed by this user nowadays, instead of like it used to be MikroTik logs where firewall rule changed, and I think you might have the user made the firewall rule change. I don't recall, but now I'm seeing full like this rule and this rule and this rule were changed, which is really useful if you're trying to backtrack.
I don't think that's like directly influenced by NIS specifically. I think it's like, especially here in Europe, you can see like the approach to security of IT infrastructure, you could say, not just networking, but that's definitely also networking, right? Like you can see the mindset and the regulation is catching up to like, this is important to have. This, when exploited, can have serious, significant effects on our lives, right? And so I think that mindset and that even the regulatory push contributes, and I think MikroTik is trying to get to a better place before they're forced to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's better to be ahead of the curve, and maybe trip a couple times, but at least then you might even be, they might be far enough ahead of the curve that they might be able to make suggestions and have the curve adjusted to where they're at or to what they would prefer, to make their lives less miserable. So then Europe, there's a ton of new requirements and such. Are like small IT shops, is there changes to what those guys are having to do? Do you know much?
So not necessarily small IT shops, but like if you are like an MSP and you are managing infrastructure of somebody who is under that critical infrastructure categorization, then yeah, you would be covered by. So it actually even covers the supply chain. Like if you are a critical infrastructure company, all of your suppliers have to be compliant with NIS.
Okay, so then is that like, are you like, I guess in that regard, as a supplier, like from the United States, what would that look like? Do you know?
So you just have to comply with the requirements, and the supplier requirements are a little bit different to what you as a entity covered by NIS are required to have. So yeah, you just have to know that your supplier is like, just look at the hacks. For example, the Target hack in the US that was done through a supplier, right? The HVAC company got hacked. The attackers through the HVAC company VPN got access to target networks and just lateral movement from there. So like yeah, there are requirements that all of your suppliers have to be under some kind of security, have to be audited, blah blah blah. Yeah, it's quite complex.
Okay, wow, so pretty big, and so we should be seeing more security stuff coming out of the likes of Ubiquiti and MikroTik and our other vendors in the space that will be benefiting everyone, not just
Well,
Europe.
we will see what the vendors do. Like technically, theoretically, the vendors are not covered by NIS. It's the implementation that is, right? So if the vendor doesn't offer the tools that you need, for example, just a simple syslog, if the vendor doesn't do remote syslog, then you cannot use that vendor because you cannot audit what is happening to that device. You don't have change management. You don't have audit trail. But that's again like it's very basic. If your vendor doesn't have syslog, then that's just a bad device, right? Like it's fairly basic requirements or assumptions that you have that. Same with SNMP, or you have to monitor it somehow. You have to know what the expected state is. It needs to have configuration. Again, like something that doesn't have a auditable configuration is just not acceptable under NIS because you need to be able to track changes in the configuration of every single device.
And that actually makes me think. So I wonder if like MikroTik's Switch OS, I know the Switch OS standard, like for the bigger switches, supports things like, syslog and stuff like that. But I'm wondering if like the lower end GPN21s,
I don't
stuff like
think
that.
it supports it at all, honestly.
Well, it supports SNMP.
Yeah, very limited set of OIDs, but yes.
Yes, but I don't think because it can't, because it won't know. You can so it so the GPN21, at least when I worked with it a couple of years ago, maybe they've updated it since, but the GPN21 that I worked with didn't have a full IPv4 stack. It didn't actually it didn't understand gateways or subnets or anything.
It doesn't need a gateway because it never initiates outbound communication. It only replies, and in that case, you don't need a gateway. Yeah.
Yeah. So
but that means you don't have any outbound communication, including syslog. Yeah.
Yeah. So GPN21s would not work in that regard. Maybe if you could tell MikroTik, hey, just give me let me enter this MAC address, and you will, and that's how you get your gateway connectivity, so that send whatever traffic to syslog traffic to this MAC address and this IP address. and hope that it works. That could work.
Technically,
Yeah.
maybe.
Technically, yeah. But then you need to have NTP because otherwise the equipment's not going to be showing at all the right time.
And not just that, you need to have full AAA, right? You need to have Radius or TechX or LDAP connector or something. And like that is way too
Yeah,
high.
that's way above what the GPIN 21. Well, that's really a bummer then. So in some regards, because it really makes that lower end cost efficient hardware not usable in the European
Well,
market in a
it's
lot of
not.
ways.
I've seen like little tiny devices that cost like $5. Have all of this. It's just about the software ecosystem and whether you can have that. It doesn't require much compute power.
Mm-hmm. So, well, I mean, encryption's kind of expensive. I mean, unless I guess you can have some chip that just offloads it, but uh, or is encryption really not as expensive as my limited programming knowledge in,
Well, you
implies?
like encryption itself, at least symmetric encryption. Yeah, sure. I suppose you could have SNMPv3 with encryption. That's another topic. But usually you just need hashing for like all of the stuff. Even for SNMPv3, when you have you don't have privacy enabled, so you don't have encryption, but you still have hashing. And it's the same for like radius logins, basic radius protocols. You know, there's four. There's PAP, CHAP, CHAP-v2, and MS CHAP-v2, whatever. Like all of that is really hashing, not encryption itself.
So, but I thought I was pretty certain that like PAP at least utilized some form of security certificate public keys encryption. No. Oh, okay.
So for example,
those
the difference between CHAP and PAP is that one does encryption at storage and the other does encryption in traffic, in transit. Sorry, and you can choose. You either want encryption at storage or encryption in transit, but you cannot have both, and that's the difference between CHAP and PAP.
Okay. So then, and those would just be symmetric key encryption.
No, it's just hashing.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So then it just hashed whatever the password is hashed, and so whatever was entered by the user is hashed and then sent back. Okay.
So you keep the hash in the database, but then you need to send the password in clear text through the network to be able to verify the clear text, or you keep the clear text in the database and you send the hash over the network. If that makes sense.
So how come you can't keep the hash in the database and send the hash with the network?
Because then you don't have anything to compare that hash against. At some point, you need to have the clear text to hash to verify what was sent to you if the hash is correct.
Okay.
Because hashing is one-way function, you need to have that clear text somewhere.
Oh, okay.
And MS CHAP is completely different because that's challenge response. But again, that's not encryption. That's challenge response handling.
Okay. So if you need to have so can you have equipment that in theory could be changed, but you disable that? Or is it just, hey, that this is allowed to be changed? It needs to have this kind of management. You know, we need to be able to have radius authentication. We need to have syslog, stuff like that.
Yeah, if you have equipment that doesn't do that, you need to change the equipment.
Okay.
Again, assuming you are covered by the critical infrastructure categorization. Yeah. So it's not for everybody, but like you can imagine, like even if you look at the history of the hospital of NHS in the UK, you know, they had so many cyber attacks there, and their hospitals were offline for literally, I think the biggest attacks took down the NHS system UK-wide for 2 days. Like you don't have hospitals for 2 days. That's fairly unacceptable, right? So yeah.
Yeah, well, and we just went through a pretty bad one with, it wasn't even a hospital, it was like an insurance broker that was down. So like hospitals couldn't check to see if you had insurance, and couldn't check to see, you know, any of this, or couldn't send, and it was, I know some offices that weren't able to send bills for weeks or months afterwards. So yeah, I mean it's a bummer that you don't have the access to costs really cheap equipment, but then again, you also it's nice to not have your equipment have your network running 24/7, 365, and this is a step towards that for a lot of companies or for
I,
Europe.
I mean, at least for me, like this is a regulation that actually makes sense to me. Like, sure, it sucks to be regulated, and it sucks to have to do stuff but in this case, I think it's quite necessary. Like, yeah, and especially like in the news, you had the cyber attacks on like water treatment facilities in the US. Remember that one? Like when they tried to inject chlorine into the water supply in like, I think this was like a couple years ago or a year
Yeah,
ago
probably
or so.
had to have been a couple of years ago. I
And
don't
like,
remember
yeah,
that.
it was a water treatment facility in the US, and they, of all things, they had TeamViewer for remote access to their water treatment facility.
Yeah, it was a team viewer, and then they like had some terrible password or something like that.
Yep, exactly. And
Yeah.
so somebody just TeamViewered in, and they started increasing chlorine concentration in the water supply. And like, that's toxic. That's literally poisonous if it gets too high, right? And like,
Yeah.
these are things which should be secured. Like, let's be realistic. These are things which should be secured. And if you can change a value somewhere and like put thousands, if not tens of thousands, people lives at risk, then yeah, that should be a system that's secured. So in this case, although I am generally against regulation and against governments telling us what to do, in this case, I think it makes sense. And probably long-time listeners will remember me ranting about stuff like this for years. So yeah.
And the trouble is that all companies, they get going and they utilize the technology, but they don't have a knowledge of what the technology is capable of doing. And you're like, oh hey, I know how. It's the classic oh shoot, who wrote the Foundation series?
Asimov?
Asimov. Yeah, that was like Asimov's like, oh well, we're just going to build these super complex systems and then we're going to forget how to run them, and then it's just magic, and then they're just going to break eventually.
Yeah, it's 40K does that fairly well.
Yes,
Yeah.
as it does it in a far darker sense.
Yeah, very much so.
Far darker, far more anti everything, joyful and decent. Well,
Like,
before we get off into the grim
yeah,
dark future.
completely different tangent.
Yeah. So there's been some news that supposedly Ubiquiti will be releasing their MLO, so multi-link option something. I can't remember
Operations?
exactly. Yeah, operation. Yeah, multi-link operation capability. They have it in a bunch of their Unify stuff. So that's their Unify stuff that supports Wi-Fi 7, right? Because I kind of skipped over 6. They did a couple things in 6, and now the new is 7. So they're supposed to be making announcements about that at WISPA. And I know everybody's really wishing and wanting for it. Supposedly, it's some point-to-point. It's point-to-points that are going to be coming out, which would be nice to get some faster point-to-points than the Air 5 XD or the Air 5 or 11. Although everybody's been having, everyone that I've heard of that has used the Ubiquiti 60 gigahertz equipment they've been really happy with those. So,
I actually, and yeah, I have to admit that I haven't read on MLO that much, but I don't even know how that will work in like other bands than 2.4 and 5 and 6, because like the standard Wi-Fi 7 for MLO, the standard defines only 2.4, 5, and 6. So how that will work in like 60 and 24 and 11 and everything else, who knows?
I mean, Ubiquiti wouldn't be the first company to take a 5 gigahertz chip and just spit it into an up converter.
Yeah, we've had that a bunch in the past. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can make anything work as long as you're willing to have it be a little dirty.
I don't know. I think that things like that in the past, when regulation, and I mean here from channel management and spectrum management, was much looser, right? You just had 2.4, 100 meg here, then
Mhm.
5, almost a gig here. But like now, when you have to go across multiple bands where the spectrum is different in every single band, and the regulation regarding spectrum use is also getting much more strict, and especially with like radar detection and everything else, right?
I'm just looking forward to the first guy who gets busted by somebody using 6 gigahertz point to points and like, hey,
Outdoors.
you are way too loud. You shouldn't. You and the FCC is gonna, because once that happens, FCC, if that happens a couple times, FCC is gonna get really grumpy, and regulators are gonna be like, we're not interested in doing this again, because all the cell phone carriers are throwing fits and fits. I think there was just a big deal about how Verizon and Sprint, or Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile were griping about that the major carriers in the United States were griping about spectrum possibly being looked at for I think it was like 2.5 or something like that. That the SEC looking at the possibility of giving that to more Wi-Fi general use, because apparently they're pretty butthurt about 6 gigahertz going the way of the free and the proud, as it were. So I don't know. I think, in as much as we don't like carriers and guys like them having licensed bandwidth, they make a good point. Like, they make really heavy and pretty dense use of the spectrum that they have. And the I don't know, what's been your experience in Slovakia? Because my experience in the United States is, if somebody's running Ubiquiti, they're probably running it above the legal limits.
Oh, very much so. But everybody's screaming as loud as they can, and
Yeah.
it actually makes it worse for everybody. Like,
Yeah.
it does. When you have like a 300 meter, okay, like 600 feet link, you don't need to scream at watt of EIRP, right? You just don't. And when you do, everybody else has to scream louder for their signal to noise ratios to be good enough. And like, yeah, but just nobody cares, right? Everybody just configures it to default full transmit strength, and off you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should be fair. There are plenty of Ubiquiti guys who are running legal, and running in legal limits. And there's plenty of Mimosa guys who figured out the tricks to getting around the Mimosa's EIRP limits. Plenty of people in Radwin and what's the wasn't Tarana. I don't know if you can get around it. I would presume that there's ways of getting around Taranas, but you don't have to do that as much. I don't know.
It's
Everyone,
always very hard to enforce, and as long as that stays true, which I don't see that changing anytime soon, then yeah, you will just have people who do that.
Yeah, and then just make. I've heard plenty of Pete's stories of guys on forums, somebody building a noise generator just to shut down somebody's tower.
Yeah.
And they hook it up to their truck and leave it running 24/7 in front of a dude's tower just to mess with them. It's like, this is asinine. So
Very much so.
yeah, like, come on, guys, we can be better than this. We should be better than this. We're trying to beat the big guys. We aren't going to be the likes of Comcast, AT&T, T-Mobile, Frontier.
But it's like, I think like the ecosystem, or maybe not, that's not the right word. The environment, to say, is changing so fast. Like, yeah, it was easy to hate the big carriers 10 years ago, right? Or even maybe, let's say, 5 to 6 years ago. But like today, your average customer, he is going to have a data plan from their mobile carrier for their phone either way, because everybody's connected 24/7 and you need gigabytes of data on your phone either way, right? And yeah, he needs to have some connectivity at home as well. And it's like very different use case, at least I feel, for those connectivities, right? So if you can fill that niche better than the carriers, which I think you can, right? I mean, high data, high trends with low latency, throughput, which you need at home, especially with all the media and especially games today, and even like updates, like stupid Windows updates taking gigabytes upon tens of gigabytes, yeah, just the mobile carriers, they won't be able to compete with you on that front still if you know what you are doing and if you are doing your job well. So it's not like.
But even like to the traditional wireline carriers like Comcast or AT&T, or well, AT&T has wireline stuff, but like Frontier, they've never had self-dealer. Like those guys are the ILECs, the incumbents, the big guys who, they've gotten billions of dollars from the government and they get tons and tons. They rake in money every single month, and it's because there's and they do terrible service because they think they're the only ones who can do it.
But
and
it's like been the same for years
ever.
Ever.
And everywhere.
So like I think like you can compete there like fairly easily and just prove your worth based on the quality of your service, right? And so that's why I at least here in my ecosystem and in other environment, I don't see mobile carriers as much of a competition, right? Of course, when you're talking about DSL,
how is Starlink as a competition there?
Non-existent, too expensive.
Non-existent, because you guys have lots of cheap internet connectivity options.
So I think I told this story before, but maybe that was a long time ago. So I'll go into a 5-minute short story. So how it works in Slovakia with internet is that internet in Slovakia has for decades now been extremely cheap. And this is because in Slovakia, how internet connectivity evolved is that we have Deutsche Telekom here, T-Mobile, T-Com, however you want to call it. So Deutsche Telekom. Anyway, so what happened in Slovakia is that Slovakia got dial-up, and that was expensive because dial-up was expensive. But dial-up stayed here for a very long time, and then ISDN started going on the scene, and the ISDN equipment that was coming into Slovakia was actually decommissioned second-hand ISDN equipment from Germany. Because it's Deutsche Telekom, right? So Deutsche Telekom was upgrading Germany to the first generation of DSL, and all the ISDN stuff got pushed into Slovakia. But since it was secondhand, and since it didn't need new lines, new hardware, etc., it was just phone, then it got very cheap from the start. So like ISDN in Slovakia already in like the very early 2000s was actually already quite affordable and cheap. And it became a race to the bottom. And then when Slovakia started adopting the first generation of DSL, it was also second-hand, hand-me-downs from Germany because they started doing ADSL, VDSL, etc. And so, it was still very cheap. And so, from the early 2000s, what is the right word? I suppose the general ecosystem of internet in Slovakia was that it's a very cheap service. And it stayed that way all the way to today. Internet is something that is cheap. And then when you have Starlink, who charges like $100 a month in Slovakia, that's ridiculous money for internet. So nobody buys it because the local ecosystem, the pricing from everybody, from all the way through like the big players to local ISPs to MDU guys, it's so much cheaper. So Starlink here is not really a factor.
I guess that's interesting to me because I know in like places like New Zealand where Starlink has really tough, very price conscious competition there. They're all the way down into like the $60-$50 or something like this, what I've heard, a month, which is like for that speed at that price in that rural of an area, it's very cheap.
Yeah, but that is because it is rural, right? So they can deliver that amount of service and that quality. But Slovakia, it's literally the center of Europe is in Slovakia. So like you have very strong competition for the bandwidth.
Okay.
from much more high-paying industries, right? And the density is very high because we are in the middle of Europe, so they cannot drive the prices down so low. I think Starlink here is 90 euros per month right now for Starlink, which is a lot. You can
Yeah.
get like full, decent gig service for 90 euros very easily. So like I think so currently if you are in like an MDU, I think T-Com or Orange, the two biggest players, they charge 30 euro a month for full gig. So that's like,
Yeah, there's no way you can compete with that. And anyway, so all right, so rolling from there, then, so then is Deutsche Telekom still a pretty big player in Slovakia as far as
yeah,
like
very
fiber
much so.
goes? Okay.
Yeah.
Are there other providers?
So from the big guys, there's T-Com, which is Deutsche Telekom. T-Com, same thing. Then there's Orange, who I don't think you have the Orange in the US,
No.
but across all of Europe, Orange is one of like the biggest providers. And then you have smaller guys that like you have APC, you have basically local mid-European providers that compete with those.
Okay. So you have a very vibrant scene, and what's
it's funny in that it's very vibrant to everybody competing to like delivery of data to end users, but we literally have like a single data center in the whole of the country. So all the traffic from me to my neighbor goes about a round trip of about 400 miles.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, that part is horrible. Like the peering ecosystem is so bad in here.
Huh. So and then
basically there is only one IX in the whole of the country, and it's all the way to the west of the country. So if you are at the east of the country, you have a round trip across the whole country.
Huh.
Assuming you are using different providers, of course. If you are with a single provider,
yeah. So, but that's interesting to me because, like, it seems that data centers would be is that just like the only carrier neutral data center, or like data center period?
Yeah, it's like the only IX in the country.
Okay.
Like each carrier, they have their own data centers. They just don't peer with each other. The only peering point is in the capital city. And even that is very small because right next to Bratislava, our capital city is Vienna. And VIX is huge, right? Almost everything and everybody passes through VIX, Vienna IX. So yeah, the local 6 Slovakian IX, it's tiny and non-used. And like I said, there's only one all the way at the west of the country. Like imagine if you were in New York, all of your cross-carrier traffic would go through LA. That's the situation in Slovakia.
Well, and I guess to me that seems like, is there just like, if I as a business wanted a place to put servers that's not my businesses and it's a data center, are there not real like data centers like that anywhere, or you just that just doesn't exist?
There are a few, but literally only a few. So in our city, Košice, which is the second biggest city in Slovakia, there are 2 data centers, and both of them are owned. So one is owned by T-Com, and the other is owned by Swan, which is another big local carrier, and that's it really. There is an IX here. There are literally 3 peerings in that IX here. It's just not used. It has like 100 megabytes traffic for an IX. It's like what?
Yeah, that's
nothing.
Yeah.
Literally nothing. So that part of the, for example, ecosystem really sucks here. Like peering and data centers, that's very underdeveloped. But like delivery of internet, and again, that goes because there is just no business demand for it here, right? For the home internet and end user delivery of data, sure, it's huge business. It's a whole country wants internet, of course. But like due to the business ecosystem being very different, that part is not as evolved.
Okay. So, and all right, interesting. And what would you say would be the business drivers to making an IX exist? Is it just so for the lower latency when your one location is connected to Bob's internet and your other location is connected to Sue's internet, and so hey, we want a VPN across this. We want this to be low latency. We want this to work, and so that's a drive for business.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Like nobody cares about that. Like most businesses are not very technical here. Like it's interesting in that like Slovakia, actually software development here is huge. It's like And you will probably find that in a lot of like Central and Eastern European countries. The software development ecosystem very good. Actually, Slovakia for the last 5 years has been, actually more, I think for the last 7 years, has been in top 5 of software developer quality in Europe, which interesting. But all of those software developers work for Western companies. You could say we are a very big outsourcing market because the local workforce or wages are much cheaper. And if you are a German company and you have work from home, it doesn't matter if the guy coding for you is from Slovakia or Germany or France or whatever, right? So why not hire in the cheaper market? At the same time, and I've definitely complained about that previously, it drives costs for software developers so high here. It's ridiculous. It's to the point where like software developer is its own class. It's like you are the top 1%, literally, wage-wise. It's ridiculous. It's bad. It creates very strong like certification of wages and all that. It's not healthy for the economy.
And then, but programmers working, if I'm working for a company in the United States, or if I'm working for a company in Germany or France, I don't care what my latency is to some business here in town. I only care about what's your connectivity out. What is Slovak? Yeah. So then, and because you guys are middle of Europe, do you guys have pretty good transport to or transit to the other countries?
Yeah, that part it could be better. So basically everything goes to Bratislava, which is the capital, which is like 20 miles from Vienna. Therefore, everything goes into Vienna, and from Vienna you can go literally anywhere in Europe fairly fast. So it's still not as good because, for example, for my city, Košice is up here, and Budapest is about 150 miles from us, but we go all the way to Vienna, Bratislava, and then down to Budapest, which is like a round trip of 30 milliseconds, where literally it could be 5 if it went direct. But there is no direct connectivity between Košice and Budapest, or up to Poland.
And North Poland. Ironically, I know that area a little bit. I have family from that area. But yeah, it's kind of rural. Well, at least north and to the east is somewhat rural.
So you have to go to like a big hub, and then from a big hub you can go anywhere. But that causes like latency to go from my city to any other major city to be in the 20s to 30s, right? Which if there were direct lines between the cities and peerings everywhere, that latency could be like sub 10 milliseconds super easily. So and it is what it is. Like that's just the nature of infrastructure here in Europe. It's a different market, different economical requirements, different
Interesting. Well, let's see here. Have you worked on any fun projects recently?
Fun as in work-wise or hobby-wise or
work, hobby-wise. I rag on Ubiquiti a lot. I'm not their biggest fan. I've used their stuff. I think it's not as bad as I make it out to be a lot of the time. And I want to give them props. So I have a customer who you might have seen me asking questions about IPv6 stuff in the Slack channel. So we were trying to deploy IPv6 on. So what he does is it's routed at the CPE network. And he has a VLAN set aside for customer traffic. And so he's worked really hard on getting all his IPv4 and customer traffic, and it's all IPv6 to the CPE, but he blocks management, so life's good. We're going on. We start to deploy IPv6, and we do this one tower, and for his MikroTik, he gets it, works, everything's perfectly fine. But when we try to deploy IPv6 so we do DHCP-PD to the Ubiquiti CPE, and then have that apply that IPv6 address as an address on its internal interface. Well, God forbid that worked nicely. What we found is like if we disabled IPv6 and then turned it back on, it would pull an IPv6 and then it would store to kind of work. DNS was spotty, like it would work and then it would stop working, and then So we spent weeks and weeks and weeks, and eventually this last week I sat down and we're like, all right, let's figure this out. What's going on here? Because there's all sorts of Ubiquiti forums posts of people trying to do similar-ish stuff and being like, it's just dying in the ether. So eventually I'm doing packet captures. I'm seeing the MikroTik's doing what it's supposed to do. So huge props to the people who post this. There's a DHCP v6 PD documentation, and I need to find my RFC useful tools. I thought I saved it, but maybe I feel really bad. I'll put it in the comments or in the show notes, guys. But basically, they walk you through. There's the specific unicast stuff, and then there's multicast stuff. And Ubiquiti's firewall allowed the unicast portion of DHCP-PD, but not the multicast.
That sucks.
So
Lovely.
yeah, so I'm doing firewall packet capture. I'm like, man, it's going through the access point. We actually, Ubiquiti allows you to capture packets on the and show, like, so they have packet sniffer that you can run, and it'll save to a file if you absolutely want to. I have no idea how hard it would be to get it off, but you can just look at and sort and filter out until you get IPv6 packets, and that's what you're looking for, and that's all you cared about it. So B gives those tools. We got the packets to the CPE. We were getting them, which I could see them. It just wasn't responding. It's responding. It should be on. And then we went through, and eventually I got into IPv6 tables, and I saw, oh, hey, there's firewall rules that are blocking everything but what the multicast stuff. So, props to Ubiquiti. Yes, their firewall, their management access prevented multicast, which is necessary for DHCP-PD6, and it blocks the ICMP and a bunch of other stuff that it shouldn't be blocking.
ICMP in v6 is literally mandatory for the protocol.
Yes. Yeah. Well, fun fact: it's blocked. They allow two things: the 2 ports for DHCP-PD, and block everything else. So it's not even a management interface block. It's literally block everything in IPv6.
That is horrible.
Yeah. So horrible, but they at least give you the tools to fix the problem, to fix their problem.
But you could argue the problem should not be there in the first place. But,
yes. But they give you the tools, which is better than a lot of other things. Like, I've had plenty of pieces of hardware where I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. I can't figure out what's going on. There's nothing for me to do here.
If you don't have that visibility, there's
plenty of VoIP hardware is that way. Plenty of even like Mimosa. Like, I was trying to figure out IPv6 stuff and doing it over Mimosa point to multipoint stuff. Point to point worked just fine. There was no problems. Point to multipoint, we had problems galore. Couldn't make it. It was very similar problems, and it was because Mimosa's access points didn't handle multicast correctly. They had to release the firmware for that. But only way to figure that out is go to Mimosa ask, or get lucky with packet captures and just understand. But there's no way to see the CPE get that. So
yeah, I don't want to go down another rant hole, but multicast not being handled correctly, that's one of the top 5 issues that, oh my god, I've run into that so many times, and vendors just need to step up. And so many things, like OSPF with multicast. Yeah, you have your IPv6 prefix delivery. You have so much things is multicast under the hood. And yeah, you don't see it, and you usually don't care for it because it just works. But if it doesn't, then so much stuff is going to break. Yeah.
Well, and especially in the user land networks, multicast is super popular. Like my Roku devices, but oh my gosh, I don't have to program IP addresses. It just bloody works, and the device shows up shortly after it boots up. As soon as it's connected to my Wi-Fi, I get a little notification. Hey, it's connected to Wi-Fi. I'm like, oh, I can control it with my phone. This is so much better than anything else. Like, that's awesome. That's multicast. And is a wonderful, beautiful feature. And yeah, that vendors don't support it. Now, admittedly, like it gets, I think some level of it is vendors just being like, well, unicast is what everybody cares about, and what we're going to focus on. And then they also like if you're building a test network, you're just like, oh well, there's this multicast traffic that's taking up space and time that I don't care about. I can see why an engineer who's under pressure of like, oh, I need to be able to get this done, would say, well, multicast, the stuff works without it. We're gonna ship this like this.
Just skip it.
Yeah, just skip that whole thing that nobody
We're
ever
just
uses.
gonna pretend that doesn't exist.
Well, actually, you know what? So take a step back. And did you ever take networking classes in college?
I didn't go to college, so no.
Okay, no. What about high school? Or any
Actually,
like somewhat
yes, I had networking
certification?
classes in high school. Yeah.
Okay, they taught you IP addresses and subnetting.
Yeah.
They taught you ports and protocols like TCP, UDP, ICMP, stuff like that. Did they teach broadcast, multicast, or was it just oh yeah, this is something that occurs?
So yeah, no, they didn't. Of course, they didn't. But you could argue they didn't teach you so much else, right? They didn't teach you spanning trees. They didn't teach you routing protocols. So yeah, there has to be a cutoff at some point where
There does, yeah.
networking ends, right?
Yeah.
But if you're a vendor making networking gear, you cannot expect to just fill like the basic networking needs. You need to, yeah.
Well, yes and no. But the thing is like if you're a new vendor, you either A, spend a boatload of money hiring somebody off of somebody else, or B, you just are like, hey, this dude took networking classes in college. He understands ports and networking and everything. Like I as a programmer would not have considered multicast and broadcast as oh, this is useless. Why do I need this? I just enter the IP address.
Like if you're a vendor in a networking space, you don't really do that. Like who these days develops their own forwarding chips? And sure, you could say Tarana. Okay, that's very very niche and very specific. But like if you are a new vendor in the networking space, you will just buy your chip of Broadcom or somebody else, and you would expect that to work as expected because all of the lower level logic is already handled for you by the ASIC. So. And if you do want to develop your own forwarding stuff, then yeah, you would expect you would hire somebody qualified and it should do what it should do.
Yes, I just am saying, well, and actually, so fun fact, I was just talking to John Fernandez. He's in Arizona. Supposedly, Aviat radios by default work as routers and are not invisible layer 2 bridges. I'm trying to remember what the word was that I used to think was really oh yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do. But I can't. Whatever. So if you were trying to rely on multicast in that situation, well, you're kind of up a creek and you have to do some sort of magic, whatever.
No, you need routed multicast like Beam or something else, but yeah, that's a whole other kind of verbs.
well, and so actually what the Aviats do is they just by default support OSPF and BGP. And so the idea being, hey, if you want something on the other end of this link, you're going to have to send it and it's going to be 2 extra hops, which is kind of cool in some regards. Like if you were trying to build some sort of redundant connectivity system, it's cool that the radios can then make decisions about when they should take the OSPF path down, or stop announcing.
You should have the options, right? If you want to run it as a L3 routed link, then yeah. But also, if you want to run it as a pure L2 link, you should have that option as well. Like, yeah, that's pretty cool that they do that, and it's a valid thing to do in so many cases. But also in other cases, it's not a valid thing to do, right?
Yeah, honestly, most everyone else in the industry is going to find that really, really weird to interact with, because
It certainly is not the norm.
yeah, I've never worked on Avia, or well, I've worked on them, but not in any situation where I would have dealt with it being a layer 3 router or anything like that. Not it was alignment, and I didn't do configuration. So I maybe Avia is different. I'm not a huge. I think they're great. They're great guys and good company. But I don't know. But yeah, it seemed really, really odd to me then. And he was like, "Oh yeah," and then you're like this, and and this is how this works. It's like, oh, that's cool. I would have been frustrated with it. But
like if you don't
yeah,
have the option to switch it to a pure L2 bridge, then
yeah,
oh yeah,
and that's what everybody expects and what everybody wants.
Yeah.
I would expect. Like I don't see a use case where it's like, oh yeah, I don't want. I mean, I was just talking with John Osmond, and I was hopeful that he would be on the show so that we could continue our conversation about extending layer 2s, because I don't like to do that, and I don't appreciate layer 2 VPNs that are trying to carry all the broadcasts and all that layer 2 traffic. It's like, I'm not a huge fan of it. I prefer a routed VPN interface.
Like, yeah, it again depends. Like, there are many, like Cisco ACI is built around this, but again, that's a campus product, not a telco/ISP product, right? Very different use case. So yeah, there are use cases where you want to stretch that L2 all the way to the edge, and then maybe even isolate every single client within their own L2 and carry it to a central location. Like I mentioned, this is what Cisco ACI does. Yeah, there is data center guys with VXLAN, which the nightmares of stretching L2 across data centers. Oh my god! But like again, in certain use cases, you just don't have a choice. You have to do that because another technology relies on that. And as much as it sucks, and as much as you don't want to do it, sometimes you just have to. So it's again about use cases, right? Something that an ISP wants to do might be very different from what a campus network wants to do versus an enterprise versus a data center. So yeah.
And in campus world, and in that situation, is it just you're trying to extend layer 2 all the way back and isolate the clients so that then you can firewall them and not have clients interacting in ways that you don't want?
Okay. In ACI, every single client gets L2 bridged all the way to the central location, and all the routing and forwarding, because in campus you don't have much traffic between the clients, right? That's everybody wants to go upstream somewhere, local servers to Ethernet to whatever. And so that's what ACI does, that for security and for traffic isolation and client isolation, yeah, they encapsulate every single client into their own tunnel, isolate them, goes all the way to the center. In center, there is security policies, there is traffic inspection, there is everything else, and then if it needs to go back, it will go all the way back. But like again, for that use case, that's valid because so little traffic is going between the clients. And many times you just want to forbid that totally and completely. Like there is no reason why two kiddos in a class, their laptops should be able to talk to each other, right?
What if they wanted to play games with each other? Come on, Kirnak.
Yeah,
are you trying to prevent children from having fun? Are you an anti-fun?
I imagine in many cases I come up as an anti-fun person, definitely.
Yeah, but and it's just getting the that's really cool though that you can do that and you can jump it back. Are they like overlaying? Is that like some sort of overlay of VXLAN?
Yeah, it's VXLAN. Yeah.
Okay.
ACI is backed by VXLAN on the backend. Okay. But it makes it really scalable because you can just connect all of your switches, access points. They just get provisioned from the ACI. Everything is fully isolated automatically. Like you don't have to care about security policies on every single device anymore, which is a very powerful tool for scaling. And at that scale and size, it just makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, do you really want to have to, run, effectively for every single one of your devices? You would at that scale, you would need to have effectively a Unimis subscription.
For something,
if you're doing that MikroTik. or a lot of other products.
Like it depends. You have solutions even for MikroTik, right? You can do capspan with .1x and do it that way. Like there are ways to do it. It's just ACI does it in a specific way. They chose like that's how they do it, and they stretch everything to the core, and you just plug in anything anywhere, builds a tunnel to the core, and things work. So again, it's like, but then again, look at the pricing of ACI, and your eyes will probably fall on your eye socket. So, like,
Yeah.
pick and choose.
Yeah. It is what that kind of cool and technical stuff. But then, do you feel like solutions like that make it so that we have fewer places for network engineers, networking people to cut their teeth, learn, grow, and become better at what they're doing? And after a certain point, you're going to start starving out the network engineer, network administrator, network technician, like employee pool.
At least I don't think so. Like, even with ACI and all of its automated magic, when it breaks, you will need to know those protocols, and you will need to dig into it. And how do you get to that point is a completely different discussion. But at least how I see it, still in the networking, there isn't a overabundance of network engineers. I feel still we need more rather than we already have enough, and this is killing the industry. To me, at least, how I see it, the problem is getting people into networking. It's such a when you are learning programming, it's like a nice positive feedback loop. You learn a little, which allows you to do more, and you learn more. And like, okay, you start with basic statements, if else, then you go into loops, but you still use that if else, then you start objects, but it like builds on top of each other, and like the snowball of learning works. But in networking, it's like every layer is completely different and separate from each other by design. We as networkers like it, but there is no like this positive feedback loop of learning. You just have to learn a protocol, then learn another protocol, then learn another protocol, and hope when you know 20 protocols that suddenly it clicks and makes sense how they interact, how, where, what, and why works. And so, like, it's a very different. What I'm getting at is like a very different learning curve and learning experience, and it requires a very specific type of a person to be a network engineer. And I think we all know that network engineers are a little bit particular bunch. Let's put it that way.
Well, actually, this actually really works back to a conversation I was having on LinkedIn. Is this lady was talking about how she fell into networking, and so did a bunch of her coworkers. And she was talking about how she was really appreciative of it was something in like networking certification track or whatever. And I'm like, that's actually an interesting point. Most everyone I know in networking are castaways of other technology or other industries. Like I'm a castaway philosopher. And by castaway, I mean like in the nice version of it, Tom Hanks had no fault of his own. But most everyone I know didn't get into networking because they were like, "Oh, I love radios," or "I love wires. I want to make them connect together." By and large, there's some guys who are amateur radio guys, but that's a niche group in and of themselves. So, but can you think of like I guess business path would be like you start off as a network technician because you needed a job and you just continue to do, but like nobody comes out of high school and is like, oh, I want to be a network technician for the local phone company. I guess.
It depends. Like, I think a lot of it can be started in an MSP, because when you are an MSP, you need to take care of everything, and you can choose, I will focus on the networks. And like, you can find a good job and a lot of job, because when you have a lot of companies and networking, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's like a decent career path. You start in an MSP, you decide, I want to do networks, you focus on those networks in an MSP, and then maybe you decide, oh, I want to try my luck in like an ISP or a carrier or somewhere else, right? Here in Slovakia, for example, a lot of guys get into networking from school because like a lot of these big companies, like I mentioned, Deutsche Telekom, T-Com/Orange/ whatever, they have apprenticeships in high schools for people to go, and they try to get a lot of people into networking that way. And many of them stick with networking, but yeah.
Huh, that's awesome. That's really cool. I've wanted to do some version of like, hey, network's a really cool job and there's a ton of jobs for it, at least in the United States, to like encourage people to be like, hey, you can actually have a reasonably decent paycheck every month doing basic telecom technician running wires. And then if you wanted to, you can shift over to other jobs and take have a home and pay for that. $60,000 is not. I've seen some places able to pay up to that much, and that's you can't do that in Colorado. You might not be able to do that here in Illinois, but there's plenty of places in the United States where that could go a pretty long way. As a telecom technician, you could have a house and family going along. So I would like to see, and like fiber splicer guys, those guys make good money.
Yeah.
So get some of those, but like there's technical schools here in the United States, but there's no like beyond, unless it's like a little itty bitty college that's wanting to, hey, get you into the trades. None of the big schools.
That's the more of the hardware path, right? But so here, yeah, you have that. A lot of kids go into like hardware for the telcos, but a lot of kids actually telcos take them into the software side of networking, and like you just work on basic tickets like troubleshoot our ports up and down, cycle ports, and that's your entire job as a kid from high school working for that. So yeah, a lot of the big guys here try to get people into it that way, and it seems to be working fairly well. Like, yeah.
That's interesting. So, well, it'd be I would love to chat with you sometime about that and see what those programs, how they flow and work. I'm pretty certain most people don't want to go super depth.
It's actually funny because like it has decreased the value of the Cisco certificates here. Like here, I don't want to exaggerate, but every other kid from high school has CCNP or CCNA certificates, and it means nothing because CCNA in school is just nothing. Okay, CCNP is a bit different, but yeah, CCNA out of high school here doesn't mean you know networking at all. It just means you had that course at school.
Yeah,
and yeah. So I don't even CCNA means nothing to me anymore in the local market. It just I ignore that on the CV.
So I have I actually just got the Juniper version of the CCNA. They have this really cool program called Open Learning, where they have like the video courses where they play through like what stuff is, and they have some book work. It's not significant, really, but they have a whole section of like basic networking that I just skipped over. I was like, I don't need that. But if you go through their whole course, do all this modules, and then do like I think better than like 80 or 85% on Juniper's online test, which you could do beforehand, and I did, and I did that. I was like 79 or 80%. I was just barely below what it would be for them to give me the free. If you do well enough, you get a voucher to go take the Juniper's version of that test, and then you to pass the Juniper version of the test, you need a 65%. So that's what annoyed me. Is like I worked my butt off. I never needed to take any of this stuff, and I would have gotten this months ago. But you get all the learning materials and such for free. You don't get access to like their online lab and stuff like that, which I can understand. That's a valuable resource. But and is expensive. But you get all the learning materials, and it was enough for me to get a 95% on the final exam. And so,
Hey, congratulations.
yeah. So, not that there's much that I really like. I got the Juniper terminology, which is valuable to me. But that's really, really cool. And if somebody's out there wanting to expand their knowledge, and Juniper's a pretty popular telecom routing platform, by far, I would say, like, that Juniper from my experience is probably the biggest name brand that, like, that if you aren't running like Sienna, something like that, or like the goofy, there's like some goofy Cisco stuff I'm trying to remember. But I've seen Junipers in more guys' networks than anything else besides Ubiquiti and MikroTik. And if you want to take the next step up, Junipers tends to be what people recommend. So if you know Juniper, it's valuable in this industry, go that route. All right, well, let's see what else is new. Oh yeah, actually, Thomas, you guys have this really cool feature coming out that in Unimis. Do you want to talk about how I don't have to log into my devices anymore if I have Unimis? I would appreciate that.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
And this was a crap ton of work. So we now have in Unimis like direct access to device CLI, basically a full terminal emulator client to connect to all of your devices in Unimis's web UI. So yeah, this basically makes Unimis into like a remote access gateway to all of your networking. Like if you're off at a conference, all you need is access to your Unimis, and you have all of your CLIs right there. And man, this was a lot of work.
All right.
Terminal emulation is such an arcane magic. It's
yeah, because like there's like, even like for me, Putty, every now and then I'll be working on what was I working in? Oh, some Linux servers. I was doing some work, and like I would do a NS lookup, and then the Putty would stop showing text unless I hit the enter key and it started writing. But like I couldn't, whatever I was typing would just blow away. And so it's like, when I see stuff like that, and I'm like, you did all of that work? Oh my goodness. And Putty's old.
That, but with Unimis, it works even with remote cores. So like if you are an MSP, for example, and you have a Unimis and manage 20 networks from Unimis through 20 remote cores, suddenly you have access to CLIs across that as well. And oh my God, I could tell you the edge cases we ran into, like just the basic thing of lifecycle management for that CLI, because you never want to leave a CLI session to a network gear hanging or open or, orphaned, basically, you could say. And like just the number of steps you have to take, because if you think about it, you have the network device, then you have the Unimis core, and there is the SSH session there. Then from Unimis core, you have the encrypted TCP session to the Unimis server, and then from the Unimis server, you have a web HTTP connection to the client. At any point in that chain, there can be a breakage, and if there is a breakage at any point, everything needs to shut down cleanly, and you need to know when to close the session to the device. And then you run into like edge cases like the HTTP connectivity to the browser we have in Unimis. That can be WebSockets or long polling if WebSockets are not allowed, and it can actually upgrade and downgrade between the two. And like, but in that case, you don't want to close the CLI session. You just want to migrate it between the long polling and WebSockets. And like all of these, it's such a mess. And then, like, what happens when you kill the browser, or your computer crashes? Then the server doesn't even know that the front end died. So, oh my God. And that's on top of all of the like handling of the CLI and terminal emulation and everything else. So this was a big amount of work.
Yeah, I'm super excited to hear about that and see it coming to fruition. And that's gonna be a lot of stuff for you guys moving forward. Like, our devices SSH sessions are like various companies' devices goofy?
Oh man, I could talk for
or are
hours.
you guys able to kind of reuse your drivers that you previously have?
Oh, I could talk for hours. And not just that, because so currently, how it is that when you click to open the device CLI, Unimas logs you in automatically to the device. Because again, there is a security model. You have to be an administrator account. There is security for that. But basically, given that security lets you, you just click open CLI and you are logged into the device and taken all the way to the prompt. So there is even handling for like logging in, and we have to know when to hand over the control of the CLI session to the user. So there is even that, like server side does some operations for you. It will log you in. If there is like a menu, or even if there is like security prompts, do you want to continue or whatever, it will handle all of that for you and hand you a clean CLI. And yeah, that's when our drivers come in, and a lot of work was like making sure we know when to hand over the control of the CLI session to the user. We display all of the stuff because the interaction that's happening from the server needs to be output to the CLI, because it would be very strange if you you have a banner on this device and there is some stuff and suddenly you don't see it. Like, that's okay, what's going on there? So yeah, it's all this redirection and capturing of output and control and all of this. So yeah, we definitely use all of our internal logic to be able to handle that. So if we didn't have all of the drivers and like the state machines and the behavioral tree that we have in our core, this wouldn't be possible. And we didn't want it to be like you click open CLI and suddenly you need to know username, password, and you need to deal with all of that. Like, why? Unimas knows this. It can make this easier for you. And yeah, that was a big part of development as well.
Man, it's making me really want to get my Linux servers in Unimas and make them do stuff. That will be that. I'm certain that's a whole nightmare universe for you.
We plan to do that, and that's because part of the NIS regulation is that all the banks now need change management on like all of their Linux servers and everything else. And this is different because we may have Ansible, you may have Puppet, you may have something that controls your Linux server, but that's not change management. That's, yeah, you declare how you want it to be, blah, blah, blah. But for the purpose of regulatory stuff, it's not change management because you aren't detecting and visualizing the changes that were done to the actual machine. Because the manifest or playbooks in Ansible are not what is on the machine. It's the declaration of the desired state. So actually, little sneak peek, hopefully soon, Unimas will be able to completely manage Linux servers as well.
Wow, there's a lot of levers in Linux. How do you decide if a file is something you need to check as a change versus...
If you remember, about 3 months ago, I think, we added custom backup flows where you can tell Unimas how and what it should back up and check on the device. Combine that with Linux drivers, and suddenly you can make your complete own rules for each of your Linux servers or for groups of Linux servers. What should be backed up, what should be change managed, etc.
Oh my gosh. And so then are you going to have like a default set of, hey, here's the default thing for a Debian server?
Exactly.
Okay. And like Apache web server?
So yeah, we will need to slowly build up those defaults. So the plan right now is that we will be able to recognize, is it a systemd system, is it a initv system, and have defaults for the system itself. But we will need to build drivers for like, is there an Apache? Is there MariaDB? Is there Postgre? If there is, and this will take a lot of time, as you can imagine, building all of those things. But the nice thing is we don't necessarily have to, because usually people will have their servers configured in a certain way and they will have preferences of what they want to do. So we will deliver like a default driver or a default set of system level things, configurations, which are being backed up and managed. And if you want something else, just use our custom flows and build a custom flow that manages what you want.
That's awesome. Congratulations, Thomas. That is
it will take time to build that, but yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to hearing about that as an announcement.
And I can give you one more internal preview. Ooh. So with device terminals right now, you can open a terminal to a single device or multiple terminals it's like PuTTY. But what they actually want to do is you will be able to build presets, like a window, let's say a 4x4 grid, which with a single click you would get a 4x4 grid of 4 devices that you choose. And you can build these like presets of multi-device connections. And then you will know, oh, these are my four tower routers that I work on together. Single click, here are all of your 4 CLIs in the 2x2 grid, and you can do stuff. So
like you can bring up all your edge routers and or like, hey, I just need the core routers so I can do diagnostics on them in between.
But like you can use these presets of CLIs you often use together, and with a single click invoke all of them in a nice structured grid and be able to work on that. And like
can I have them and then have them launch while they're running a command?
So that's another thing. Like we need to decide, maybe we want to do like use this config push preset and apply it to these windows, but also see the output there. It's still like we only have so much development power, sadly. So like all of this will take a lot of time, and especially this is very front end heavy, and so a lot of development goes into things like this. So these terminal presets, we think sometimes probably in the half of next year, probably Q2 next year, until we get that working. So it's a bunch of work, but like to me at least, even that, like being able to build all of these CLI presets that I commonly work with together and be able to open it with one click, it's so much time saving. Oh.
Yeah. No, that would be very, very useful in a lot of different situations when you're just cracking along. Or, if you have you have a consistent problem that you're trying to get back to, you've left for the day, you come back and you're like, all right, let's take me back to where I was. I know that's been a problem. Like, you end up late. It's 11 o'clock. You're like, all right, I have to go home. I need some sleep. I'm not going to figure this out tonight.
Just
close everything down.
Preset.
Yeah. Then, you don't have to worry about, oh, is everything going to close? Have I unlocked safe mode everywhere? All that stuff. Yeah. That is very nice.
Yeah. Like the plan is to have like a complete Tmux replacement in Unimes web GUI without having to learn Tmux and deal with all of the, all of the craziness there. But it will take time.
Okay. What about equipment that doesn't understand like backspace? So you have to do like Control H.
That works.
Okay, so Control H works, or can I map backspace to Control 8 for that particular piece of equipment? Because it's a stupid situation to run into.
So what we want to do actually is our drivers can translate this for you. We just need to start collecting the data in the driver, and then you wouldn't even need to know or need to map it manually. The driver would just know, oh, this device needs Control H instead of backspace. So when we send the backspace, I send Control H.
That would be magical, because zone gear is stupid. That was a problem that we figured out back in 1980s. we do not need to continue this. Everyone else uses backspace, understands backspace. That would be a super awesome feature to have. All right, well, cool. Well, we're kind of getting towards the end of the time I booked out. Is there any other fun industry things that you've seen occurring of late?
Nothing that comes to my mind right now. I'm sure after we finish, I'll be like, I should have talked about that.
Yeah. So Jeff Broadwick announced that Tarana, I think has actually announced it themselves as well, that they're going to have a cheaper, something cheaper. Nobody said exactly what will be cheaper.
And how, and
yeah. So like what that would be, my guess is they'll have a like a 2x2 CPE, so it won't be able to do multi-user MIMO as well as their current CPEs. But their current CPEs are expensive. So, if you can bring that price down, which is the biggest portion of any wireless network deployment, most of the time, in my experience, if you do an access point with, that's $5,000 in each of your CPE, you can do 30 of those and they're each $100. Well, that's gonna be $3,000. Or no, wait, more. Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah, and
And
also the
most
subscription
most
that's there.
the Tarana subscription is also expensive. And their CPEs are not $100. It's a couple $100, and their access points are they're wavering around. I think I've seen some things under $10,000, but most of the time I'm seeing 12 to
It's a
14.
significant
So
cost.
yeah, so that's anything that can help like the deployment for guys who are in more rural environments or who aren't deploying with government money. It's going to be beneficial for Tarana to build out their base, and honestly is going to give start to squeeze out Ubiquiti even more, because if Tarana can have something that's better than Ubiquiti but somewhat more price conscious, maybe more along the EPMP 3000 or EPMP line, that's actually really, I don't think you're going to kill Ubiquiti with a cheaper Tarana CP. I think you're going to kill Cambium with
I
a cheaper
think
CP.
Ubiquiti, at this point, like such a minority of their income is from the WISP space, they don't really care.
Yeah. And the LTU line kind of flopped, and kind of flopped. Would you say? I don't know. I say flop. Would you say flop? Would you agree with that?
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
At least I
Yeah.
don't see any mass adoption of it.
Yeah, there's some guys using it in some places, but they're very few and far between.
It's not a massive market for us, I wouldn't say.
No, probably there's a bigger market for outdoor MikroTik point to multipoint.
Like MikroTik is huge in
Yeah,
not
South America.
US or South
Yeah.
America, Africa, Asia, so huge.
Yeah. So, I don't think Toronto's can touch those markets just
Nope.
because those
Just-
margins are so narrow.
No,
Oh,
the purchase price is such a big barrier. It would never even get purchased. Like,
well,
there's
what would happen is if let's say Toronto they were like, hey, we have miles and miles of markup here. We just want to sell. We want to be everywhere. If they tried to start selling in Africa, United States would start importing and you'll add something reasonably
very
rich.
much so.
We would import African, and so they'd have to figure out some way to geolock that not everyone in their mother has a way to get around.
Yeah.
But
Well, we
and
will
I
see
think
what the big announcement from Tarana is.
yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be nice to see it, but they're continuing to. I have seen no slowing down in people purchasing them left and right. So I think that they are continuing to. Mike Hammett was always telling me that they're just ready to flop. They're getting we've seen this before. Everyone's come there's somebody who comes out with some random new stuff, and they're supposed to be amazing, and then nobody's using them 2 years later. For
we will
whatever
see.
reason.
Tarana is
Yeah.
still very young. It's still, and considering how much money they took from VCs, and it's still entirely possible that they are still burning money. And the question is how much of a runway they have, and if their market adoption is fast enough to catch up to the runway they have. And that's a question that's not decided yet.
Well, I think in some ways, yeah, it's not decided. In others, like I'm seeing places be out of stock of Tarana, so I think that they are selling out of equipment, fairly routinely.
Like again, that might not be good either, because if they cannot fill inventory fast enough, they are missing on sales, and again, their incomes will reflect that. And so
that's a manufacturing problem.
Yeah, but for an outsider, manufacturing problems have killed many a vendor.
Yeah.
Like, from an outsider's point of view, there is just no way to know if they are breaking even, if they are in black or green numbers, and what's going to happen with them. At least to me as well. I'm not saying they will fail or flop. I'm saying I still think it's too early to know whether they will be successful or not. And whether US market, because let's be realistic, for the prices they charge and the subscriptions, nobody else other than the US market is going to buy this. They have zero chance in Europe. Europe. They have zero chance in the UK. It's just like I mentioned here in Slovakia, that level of pricing for a gear, nobody's going to buy it because they cannot make margins on their internet subscriptions because those are really cheap. So like the question even is like, is US big enough of a market to, actually for a company with that much investment in it and that much money to make sense? Again, I don't want to make any assumptions because I don't know, but I'm just saying it's very hard to know if
that is true.
Will survive.
Yeah, and the international market definitely is going to be very difficult for them.
Impossible, I would say. With current pricing.
Like, I guess where else was Cambium really popular?
I don't know.
Well, I know. I think Tom Smith. He was a Cambium guy. Anybody out there want to let us know? What are they? Where else in the world has lots of money and high density? I guess India.
India doesn't have lots of money.
well, so you say that, but one of their companies, Giro, bought out Mimosa from Airspan, just so that they could have a high density Wi-Fi 6 access point that could do multi-user MIMO in both directions. So, that was
I would argue that we don't actually know what Giro's is doing with Mimosa, right? Is it successful? Is it not? Was it just a VC deal? Did they buy them? We don't, at least I don't know. Are they really deployed in India?
Supposedly they had, from what I have heard from most employees, that Giro was their biggest customer in the world before they were bought by Giro. And they had a lot, and they were using, like, that's where most of Airspan's resources were going into, was supporting Giro's network and Giro's personnel.
Yeah, but like, do we see anything new out of Mimosa? Are they innovating? Are they still bringing new products to market? It's hard to say what the...
Yeah, and we see I think the B6X has come out, and then the A6 X hardware technically is out, but it's not. The software's not there yet, from what I've heard. My couple buddies who are running Mimosa equipment, they haven't been able to get SRS working. So that's the big problem. Is nobody has anything that can compare to Tarana on a price for performance basis, or any on they can't be better in in any one category than Tarana, other than price. And if you want to do more than 100 megs to a lot of customers over a wide area, Tarana's kind of the king, and they're definitely the king for non-line of sight. Like, hands down. Yeah. There's no one that has posted it, no company that has had more people post more crazy success stories. Now, admittedly, I'm waiting for those same people to be like, oh, hey, don't do this as much as you want, because yes, you can get a customer connected, but there's only so much time in a millisecond for you to send transmit data, and there's only so much time in a millisecond for you to receive data. And if you have to spend that time, more of those slots of time, listening for a slower connection, that's what has gotten every single Ubiquiti and every single Mimosa and every single MikroTik user for years into trouble. Is they connect up terrible clients just to get them connected, and then their access point isn't able to perform, and then it's like, oh, well, here's what you got to do. You have to get rid of these people that have terrible connections. Either fix them or get rid of them. And that's going to bite. Now, you can get away with more of it with Tarana because you split up your time slots into multiple different directions, but that doesn't mean that you aren't still slowing yourself down. So that's something that I really want people to like consider when they're doing these non-line of sight connections is, can you make money off of doing a bunch of these and slowing your access point down to not performing at what your beautiful connections are able to do. So
yeah, we will see.
We will see.
Will tell.
Time will tell. Physics can never be beaten. It can only be circumvented for a time.
Speed of light doesn't get faster.
Speed of light doesn't get faster. The amount of spectrum is only is fixed. All right, well, Kirnak, what else we got? People want to get a hold of you out there on the internet. What should they do?
With me, as always, unimus.net. There is live chat there. Ask for me, I'll be there.
Okay. So the Brothers WISP at gmail.com. That's to get a hold of me when I'm wearing my Brothers WISP hat. Not my Mimosa by Airspan hat. I love these like failed companies hats. That's what I love to collect. If you have failed companies that failed spectacularly, just hit me up. I might pay for shipping for a hat, or pay for the hat even. If you want to bug me about other stuff, lostcreek.tech. You can email me at tommy@lostcreek.tech. Hit me up. I've got some new blog posts talking about projects I've been working on, and I will be writing up the entirety of the saga of getting IPv6 working on routed Ubiquiti, working in router SV7 and OSPF, making all that play nice, and the various things and foibles we ran into. So, yep, hit me up, look us up. Patreon.com/The Brothers WISP. And any of you guys who listen to the podcast who are going to be at WISPA, hit me up. Love to chat with you. So, take care.
Yeah, come and visit our booth.
Yeah, don't leave Thomas all alone. He has good chocolates.
The brothers.
You're now listening to Greg, it's the Brothers WISP. Let's take a ride through space on this mothership. Wireless networking, we talk about equipment and methodology, so sit back and start learning. Lighten up the tower so people can start searching. Shooting up the web in neighborhoods, net surfing. We got horrible jokes, we're loud and annoying, but we're informative facts, we're not disappointing. Just give us a listen, cause fun is the mission. I'm telling you, you don't know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.